Good Monday afternoon, everybody. I'm meteorologist Tim Pandages here with your tropical update, and today we've got a tropical trio. 3 separate systems out there: Fred, Grace, and now tropical depression number 8 likely will become Henri, the 8th named storm of the year, in the next few hours probably before this evening's out. So Fred is on the verge of making landfall along Florida's panhandle this afternoon. Grace will miss the storm-shredding higher terrain of Hispaniola, and TD8, as I mentioned, forecast to become Henri, making kind of a loop-de-loo around Bermuda. You'll see it on the maps. Kind of an interesting storm path here. Here's an overall perspective of what's going on. Very active out there with 3 named systems. Well, 2 named systems, one about to have a name, which would be Henri. Fred is of the highest interest right now. It is impacting the United States, in particular the panhandle of Florida, with gusty winds, storm surge flooding, heavy rainfall, and a lot of rough surf out there too. Latest update at 1 p.m., it is a little bit stronger too. 65-mile-per-hour winds. It's only moving to the north-northeast at 9 miles an hour, so it's about 40 miles as of the recording of this video south of the Florida coast, so it will be making landfall by late afternoon, early evening there, and then starting to weaken quickly thereafter after it's away from its fuel source, the very warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Now, this did go on a spout of intensifying starting early this morning. It was about 45-mile-an-hour winds earlier today, up to 50, and then it jumped up to 65. Now, what saved this from probably becoming a Category 1 hurricane before landfall is it ingested a little bit of some dry air, and you can kind of see that here on the visible satellite imagery, some clearing in that cloud structure there. That ingestion of the dry air choked off the intensification process and slowed things down a bit and helped the system to kind of plateau as it moved onshore there. You can even see this a little bit better on water vapor imagery. Dry air in the yellow, some of that dry air getting pulled into the system there, and it's also a little bit of a lopsided system. It's definitely not symmetrical, and that indicates probably a little bit of some wind shear working on this system as well. Here's a look at radar sites out of Florida. We got Eglin Air Force Base in Tallahassee. A lot of heavy rainfall. The bright yellows, the oranges here is rainfall rates 1 to 2 inches per hour. So we're looking at a lot of moisture moving onshore. And as I put this in motion, you can see the storm center of Fred there just south of the Florida coastline, lifting its way a little bit farther to the north, little by little at 9 miles per hour. Its pressure at 994. Now, if I switch things up here and show you, if you can see that yellow outline there, that's a tornado watch box. A lot of times you'll see a tornado threat moving on land as it gets introduced to the friction of the land and the spin already in the atmosphere from this overall circulation. So it makes it a little bit easier to flare up some tornado activity. No warnings out there yet, but it's certainly a potential as it moves onshore later today. Now let's look at the wind field on Fred. Now, again, lopsided here because the majority of the wind, at least tropical storm force winds, extending out about 100 miles from the center off to the northeast and to the southeast, hardly getting any wind west of that center there. And we typically do find the strongest of the winds in this part of the storm, the northeast quadrant, relative to its storm movement. Now, 16-foot waves expected just off the coast of Florida here later today. In terms of wind speeds, by later on this afternoon, we could get up and over 50 miles per hour out of Apalachicola. It moves onshore, we start to see those winds come back down, but even by early evening, still getting tropical storm force winds there. The wind field starts to die down as it moves farther inland, and it rapidly starts to decay and weaken. All right, the different sides of a tropical system, we haven't talked about this in a while. So that front right quadrant, the winds and surge are going to be the greatest. You're going to get that onshore flow. You couple the wind speeds with the storm movement here, which is why you get the strongest gusts. The back right has significant strong winds too. Back left, weak, but still any quadrant of a tropical system, a hurricane, pretty dangerous still. All right, we talked about those onshore winds now, persistent here. So anywhere east of that storm track, we do have a storm surge warning. I saw some reports there of 1 to 2 foot storm surge in some spots. It was coupled with the astronomical high tide this morning, but even without that, it's still some flooding there. Not terribly bad, but flooding nonetheless is not a good situation. On top of that, tropical storm warnings extending inland to southern portions of Alabama and southwestern Georgia, as those winds will extend a little farther inland. And of course, with tropical systems, a lot of moisture. It's going to rain itself out as it tracks inland, and look at that spine of very heavy rain along the Appalachian Mountains. So that interaction with the enhanced topography is going to rain out that system even more. So we could see 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 inches of rain in far northeastern Georgia, western portions of South Carolina, and of course western North Carolina along the mountains there too. So a lot of rain with this lifting up into the Carolinas and eventually into Virginia too. Official storm track here. Again, we know where it's going. It's moving on shore and then pretty much due north, weakening fast after it's away from its fuel source there, the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. All right, that was one system. We got two more. Here's Grace. West-northwest winds at west-northwest movement, I should say, at 12 miles an hour. If you remember yesterday morning and even Saturday, this thing was zipping along at like 27 miles an hour. So it's cut its forward speed in half. So it has a little more time to take advantage of the warm ocean waters. Also, what's going to help this system out, not necessarily a good thing by any means, but it's missing Pico Duarte, or even Hispaniola in general. Its center is not moving over land, that enhanced terrain there that shredded Fred a couple days ago. It's moving just to the south there and will likely pass just north of Jamaica and south of Cuba, staying over very warm sea surface temperatures. Overall, the storm still, even though missing the landmass of Hispaniola, not all that organized. 35-mile-per-hour winds, tropical depression here. It hasn't done much strengthening. It's plateaued for the last 36 hours. And eventually, in time, over the next 24 hours or so, it should start to get its act together and organize a little bit better as it moves westwards. Now, on the water vapor imagery here, any dry air, at least significant dry air, some Saharan air layer well off to the east there, out through the Windward and Leeward Islands, doesn't look like it'll catch up to this system. Any dry air out in front of it, it should be able to shield itself pretty well from it. Here's that official track from the National Hurricane Center. Takes it up to a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm just north of the Yucatan by Thursday morning. Borderline tropical storm to hurricane as it enters the southern Gulf of Mexico, Bay of Campeche here to the south. Now, you may be wondering, well, what's going on here? Why is this moving pretty much due south? Well, something in the computer models that's been very consistent over the past several days and all the runs that come with it is a ridge of high pressure expanding into the northern portions of the Gulf of Mexico. And essentially what that's doing is creating a buffer or a bumper to keep Grace to the south, potentially into the Yucatan Peninsula there. Of course, land interaction, never good for a tropical system, but the Yucatan relatively flat, and a lot of times we see storm systems impact there and not weaken too much, especially when they re-enter into the Gulf of Mexico into very conducive environments for more organization and more growth. But this should keep things safely to the south of the United States, but again, still making land impacts. People still do live in the Yucatan, and eventually this does track even farther to the west and potentially impacts Mexico. Now, the United States isn't completely out of the cone of uncertainty. If you can see there, like Brownsville, Texas, far southern portions of Texas, on that 5-day cone is in that cone of uncertainty there. I want to show you the models now because the models are really picking up on that expanding ridge of high pressure to the north. This is the GFS ensemble. GFS model runs several different times. We tweak it a little bit. This is really buying into that. Most of these members riding on the southern tier of that cone of uncertainty. Of course, a few outliers, but the majority to the south. All the other computer models, very, very similar too. Some are a little bit more on the northern edge of that cone, but overall still in general agreement with this tracking almost due west-northwest and sparing, at least for now. Things can certainly change. The ridge could not be as strong. It could not back all the way in, or it could weaken here in the western parts of the Gulf and allow a recurvature to the north. So this certainly bears watching, but here's how things look now. The environment that it's moving in is very conducive. Warm sea surface temperatures. We've talked about this every single video. These temperatures aren't getting cooler. They're only getting warmer. In the mid-80s now, for tropical development, you need 80-degree waters or higher. Not a problem here. On top of that, this is parts of the ocean that have the highest ocean heat content in the entire basin. These yellows and oranges here indicate not warm waters just at the surface, but all the way down several hundred meters. So that means that when Grace moves over them, or any tropical system really in general, mixes up the ocean, something called upwelling. Typically, if we only had the skin of the ocean really warm, that upwelling would bring up cool waters from the depths and limit the potential of the storm. when you have something like this, I mean, you're just continuously upwelling warm water, so that wouldn't be so much of an issue. Global models, GFS European comparison here, general agreement here with some development and organizations south of Cuba, and then here we are by Wednesday night, early Thursday morning, well, midnight Thursday. We've got a system right on the northern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. Both the European and GFS say, yeah, it's a pretty well organized, maybe a high-end tropical storm by that point. Probably weakened slightly with the interaction of land. And then it's game on here as it gets into the Gulf of Mexico. GFS goes very bullish on this and says, this is a bona fide hurricane by the time it's in the Bay of Campeche by Friday night. Not set in stone, like we've said every time we've shown this. It can change and likely will, but it's good to see that most models are in agreement on that west-northwest track. But still, areas will be under the gun that have populations that will be vulnerable to this. All right, tropical depression number 8. This thing's just meandering out there in the middle of the Atlantic. There is Bermuda. Here's the storm. Infrared, it looks okay. Nothing special. On visible satellite, definitely a little bit of some northern shear impacting it here. Most of the convection and thunderstorm activity ending up to the southwest of that storm center. What's the track on this? This is kind of interesting because it pretty much loops all the way around Bermuda. As it does so, it gradually strengthens up to Tropical Storm Henri and then shoots off to the north and most likely even farther north into the North Atlantic. Eventually encounters cooler ocean temperatures and starts to fall apart. By the way, as Fred makes landfall later this afternoon into this evening, that would make it the 4th storm system to make landfall in the United States so far this year. All right, until next time, you can find me on social media. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear from you. Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook. We'll see you again tomorrow.